A man was found dead in a room only he could open. No one entered. No one forced the door. And that's exactly how it worked. The Ashcroft Institute never used the word cell. They said room. Sometimes space. Occasionally environment. Anything but a word that suggested confinement. That mattered to them. At 11:06 p.m., Evan Cole signed the consent form with a steady hand. Not because he wasn't afraid. Because he was tired of explaining why he was. The nurse across the desk, Donna Keene, watched him closely as he wrote his name. She had learned to read hands better than faces. Faces lied. Hands hesitated. Evan's didn't. "You understand," she said carefully, "that you can leave at any time?" Evan nodded. "Yes," he replied. "That's the point." Donna smiled politely, but something in her eyes stayed alert. Everyone said that. They always meant something different by it. Safe room 3 was at the end of the corridor. The walk there was intentional. Long enough to reconsider. Short enough to prevent conversation. The corridor walls were padded, not for safety, but for silence. Even footsteps softened into something almost respectful. Evan noticed that. "It's quiet," he said. Donna nodded. "We find that helps," she replied. She didn't say too much. The door to safe room 3 was thick and matte gray, without a handle on the outside. No keypad. No lock. Just a smooth surface and a small green indicator light. Donna stopped beside it. "This door opens from the inside only," she said, repeating the line she'd said dozens of times before. "When you're ready to leave, you place your palm on the sensor and apply pressure." Evan looked at the door. "And if I'm not?" he asked. Donna hesitated for half a second. "Then you stay," she said. Evan nodded. "That's fair," he replied. Donna didn't like the way he said that. Inside, the room was smaller than Evan expected. Not cramped. Contained. Soft light filtered from hidden panels in the ceiling. The walls were a neutral color that resisted description. No corners were sharp. No edges demanded attention. There was a bed. A chair. Nothing else. No clock. No clock. Evan noticed that immediately. "No time?" he asked. Donna shook her head. "Time creates pressure," she said. Evan smiled faintly. "Pressure is usually what makes me mess things up," he said. Donna didn't answer. She stepped back toward the door. "You'll hear us through the intercom if we need to check in," she said. "Otherwise, the system will guide you." "The system?" Evan asked. Donna placed one hand on the door frame. "Just a voice," she said. "Neutral. Reassuring." Evan nodded. "That's fine," he said. "I like clear instructions." Donna forced a smile. She didn't. The door closed with a sound that was neither loud nor quiet. Final. The green light shifted. Locked, but not by anyone else. Evan stood alone in safe room 3. For the first time that day, his shoulders relaxed. At 11:09 p.m., Evan sat on the edge of the bed and exhaled. He hadn't realized how tightly he'd been holding himself together. The silence wasn't empty. It was deliberate. Evan closed his eyes. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a voice spoke. "Welcome," it said calmly. "You are safe here." The voice was neither male nor female. It had no accent. No personality. Evan opened his eyes. "Hello," he said automatically. The voice paused. "You do not need to respond," it said. "This space is for you." Evan nodded, even though no one could see him. "Okay," he murmured. The voice continued. "Your heart rate is elevated. This is expected. You are not in danger." Evan felt a flicker of relief. Being told he wasn't in danger always helped, briefly. Remember, the voice said, you are in control of this space. You decide when it ends. Evan leaned back against the bed. That's good, he said quietly. I don't trust myself with other people. The voice did not respond. It wasn't designed to. Outside the room, Donna Keene sat at the monitoring desk with a mug of tea she hadn't touched. Evan's vitals appeared stable. Heart rate slowly declining. Respiration even. No sudden spikes. Looks like a good one, a junior nurse said softly. Donna didn't answer. She was listening to the audio feed. Not the words. The spaces between them. Back in the room, Evan lay down. His thoughts slowed, not because they stopped, but because there was nowhere for them to go. No phone. No clock. No interruptions. Just the voice, occasionally reminding him to breathe. You are doing well, it said. There is no need to rush. Evan smiled faintly. I rush because I don't want to hurt anyone, he said. Silence. Then the voice replied. You are alone here. You cannot harm anyone. Evan closed his eyes. That's what I like about it, he whispered. At 12:34 a.m., the system adjusted. Not dramatically. Barely enough to register. Airflow reduced. Sound frequency shifted. The room grew warmer by a fraction of a degree. Evan stirred. He sat up slightly, brow furrowing. I feel strange, he said. The voice answered immediately. This is a normal response, it said. Your body is relaxing deeply. Evan took a breath. Then another. They felt heavier than before. Outside, Donna glanced at the monitor. Oxygen's dipped a bit, the junior nurse said. Donna frowned. Within limits, she replied automatically. She watched the numbers. They hovered. Should we, the nurse began. Donna shook her head. Intervention breaks the process, she said. The words tasted wrong. She swallowed them anyway. Inside safe room 3, Evan sat upright. His chest felt tight. Not panicked. Compressed. I think I should leave, he said. The voice responded calmly. You are experiencing a common urge to escape discomfort, it said. This will pass. Evan's hand hovered over the sensor panel near the door. He froze. If I leave, he said slowly, I'll have to talk to people again. Silence. Then. You are safe here, the voice said. Evan lowered his hand. Minutes passed. Or maybe they didn't. Time was difficult without markers. Evan lay back down, breathing shallowly now. His thoughts circled one idea. If I stay, no one gets hurt. The voice spoke again. You are doing the right thing. Evan smiled weakly. Thank you, he whispered. At 2:18 a.m., Donna stood up from her chair. Something felt off. Not the numbers. The rhythm. She leaned closer to the speaker. Evan, she said softly. No response. She tapped the console. Evan, can you hear me? Nothing. The junior nurse looked up. Protocol says wait, she said. Donna stared at the door. Smooth. Silent. Unyielding. He can open it himself, Donna said, more to herself than anyone else. The nurse hesitated. And if he doesn't, she asked. Donna didn't answer. At 3:02 a.m., Evan Cole's heart stopped. There was no spike. No panic. Just a gradual slowing. Like a decision settling. The system logged the event automatically. Outside the room, an alarm chimed, soft, apologetic. Donna stood frozen. She knew what came next. They would wait. They always did. At 6:41 a.m., the door to safe room 3 was forced open. Metal bent. Locks failed. The sound echoed down the corridor like an accusation. Inside, the room looked untouched. Evan lay on the bed, hands folded loosely over his chest. Peaceful. As if nothing had gone wrong. Later, when they reviewed the audio, someone paused the recording. "There," they said. "Do you hear that?" A voice. Not Evan's. Not Donna's. Calm. Reassuring. Telling him he was doing the right thing. No one entered the room. No one needed to. The door had done exactly what it was designed to do. So had the system. So had Evan. 3 days later, Edward Hale received a call. "It's a locked room," the voice on the line said. But no one locked it. Edward was silent for a moment. Then he said quietly. Then someone taught it how to stay closed. Edward Hale arrived at the Ashcroft Institute under a sky that looked professionally bleak. Grey in every direction. Rain that couldn't decide whether it wanted to commit. Wind that made the trees lean as if they were listening. The building itself sat above the coast like a private thought, modern, quiet, expensive, determined not to look like a hospital. It succeeded. Ashcroft looked like a place where nothing bad was supposed to happen. Edward distrusted places like that. A security gate opened without the sound of effort. Edward parked in a small lot where the cars were clean and the gravel was raked into lines. The kind of detail that suggested someone had time to control the surface of things. A woman met him at the entrance. Dr. Helen Morris. Early 40s. Straight posture. Clear eyes. A controlled smile designed to reassure without inviting closeness. "Mr. Hale," she said, offering her hand. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Edward shook it. "People usually call me when they've run out of language," he said. Helen's smile tightened by a fraction. "We have plenty of language," she replied. "What we need is interpretation." Edward nodded. "That's usually what people mean," he said. She didn't laugh. They walked through a lobby that smelled faintly of citrus and antiseptic, the Institute's attempt at moral cleanliness. There were no obvious medical posters. No warnings. No visible panic buttons. Just soft lighting, art that was deliberately abstract, and a reception desk that looked more like a concierge than a nurse's station. Helen guided him down a corridor with muted carpet and sound-dampening walls. "You've read the summary," she said. "I read what you sent," Edward replied. "That's not the same thing." Helen glanced at him. "What do you mean?" "It means I've read your version," Edward said. "Now I want the room's version." She didn't like that, but she kept walking. Safe Room 3 was in a separate wing. A locked door opened with a badge swipe, revealing a short passage and another door beyond it, thicker, heavier, less decorative. Helen stopped before the second door. "This is it," she said. Edward took a moment to look at the surface. Matte gray. No handle outside. No visible lock. A small panel at shoulder height with a faintly glowing indicator. He felt the impulse to touch it, then resisted. He didn't like how quickly the room invited instinct. "Tell me," Edward said, "what you want me to believe before I see it." Helen's jaw tightened. "I want you to understand that this was a tragic medical event," she said. Edward nodded. "And what do you want me not to think?" Helen's eyes held his. "I don't want you to think the treatment caused it," she said. Edward's voice stayed calm. "That's exactly what you don't get to decide," he replied. She swiped another badge. There was a soft click. "Doors already been opened," Helen said quickly. "After the incident." Edward looked at her. "Forced open," he corrected. Helen paused. "Yes," she said. "Forced." Edward stepped closer and inspected the edges. He could see where the frame had been stressed, where something had bitten into metal and bent it. A door designed not to be opened from outside always left scars when people tried. Edward inhaled. "Before we go in," he said, "tell me what the official story is." Helen exhaled through her nose. Patient Evan Cole was placed in the safe room as part of our autonomy protocol, she said. He was monitored overnight. His vitals appeared stable until they didn't, Edward said. Helen nodded tightly. At 3:02 a.m., cardiac arrest, she said. No evidence of panic, no signs of struggle. Edward's gaze stayed on the door. And the cause of death? Helen hesitated. Hypoxic event, she said. Asphyxia. Edward looked at her. In a safe room, he said. Yes, Helen replied. Which is why we called you. Edward's tone was flat. No, he said. You called me because you're hoping my presence means the story ends in complexity, not responsibility. Her expression flickered. Then she opened the door. The room was disappointing. That was the first thing Edward felt. Not because it wasn't clean or impressive. It was. But because it looked ordinary in the way traps often did. Soft light. Neutral walls. A bed with crisp linen. A chair. Nothing else. No window. No clock. No visible vents. The air smelled faintly warm and still. Edward walked in slowly and stood at the center, letting his body register details before his mind tried to solve them. He heard his own breathing too clearly. Locked room, Helen said behind him, careful. No external entry. The door only opens from the inside. Edward turned and looked at the door. Show me, he said. Helen stepped just inside, lifted her hand to the panel on the interior wall beside the door. A smooth sensor. She pressed her palm against it. Nothing happened. She pressed harder. Still nothing. She frowned, then tried again with more pressure. A soft click. The door unlocked. Helen pushed it open easily, too easily. Edward watched her. Pressure sensor, he murmured. Yes, Helen said. It only responds to a deliberate press. We designed it to prevent accidental openings. Edward nodded slowly. And to reinforce agency, he said. Helen's expression tightened again. That's the point, she said. Edward looked at the door and then at the empty room. Agency without an outside option isn't freedom, he said quietly. It's responsibility dressed as comfort. Helen didn't answer. Edward crouched beside the bed. No marks. No scratches. No signs of struggle. If you didn't know a man had died here, the room wouldn't tell you. That bothered him more than blood would have. Blood demanded reaction. Cleanliness demanded interpretation. He stood and walked slowly along the walls, looking for seams, panels, anything suggesting a hidden mechanism. Nothing obvious. Then he stopped. He didn't hear anything. But he felt something. A faint pressure in the chest, almost like being in a room with expensive silence. Edward turned his head slightly, as if sound might reveal itself from a different angle. You're running something even now, he said. Helen's eyes narrowed. The room is inactive, she replied. Edward looked at her. You sure? He asked. Helen held his gaze. Yes, she said. We shut down the protocol. Edward nodded. Good, he said. Because if it's still active, it's still persuading. Helen's jaw tightened. This isn't persuasion, she said. It's environment. Edward smiled faintly. Environment is persuasion, he replied. They left the room and walked down the corridor toward an office where a man waited with the expression of someone forced to speak to a psychologist. Mark Ellison. Engineer. Tall. Angular. Hands that looked like they preferred tools to people. He didn't stand when Edward entered. That was either arrogance or fatigue. Edward didn't care which. Mr. Hale, Mark said. You're the consultant. Depends who you ask, Edward replied. You built the door. Mark nodded once. I designed the safe room system, he said. Door, sensor, seals. Edward sat opposite him. Explain to me, Edward said, how a person dies of asphyxia in a sealed room with no obvious oxygen deprivation. Mark's eyes flicked to Helen, then back. There is ventilation, he said. Edward raised an eyebrow. In the walls, Mark continued. Hidden. It maintains air quality at safe levels. Edward leaned forward. Safe levels, he repeated. Define safe. Mark's jaw tightened slightly. Regulatory safe, he said. Edward nodded. And does regulatory safe consider panic disorders? Edward asked. Mark looked irritated. Air is air, he said. Edward's voice stayed calm. Air is chemistry, he replied. And chemistry changes behavior. Mark stared at him. You think this is psychological, he said. Edward nodded. I think everything is, he replied. But I also think someone is hiding something technical behind your confidence. Mark's eyes sharpened. I'm not hiding anything, he said. Edward smiled faintly. Then you won't mind showing me the logs, he said. Mark hesitated. Helen interjected smoothly. We can provide system reports, she said. Edward looked at her. Not summaries, he said. Raw logs. Helen's smile held, but her eyes cooled. Of course, she replied. We'll cooperate fully. Edward let the silence sit. Full cooperation was often the first lie institutions told themselves. On the way to the monitoring suite, Helen tried again. I know how this looks, she said. Edward glanced at her. How does it look? He asked. Helen exhaled. Like we built something unsafe, she said. Edward nodded. Or, he said, like you built something safe for the wrong type of person. Helen's face tightened. Our patients are screened, she said. Edward stopped walking. Then tell me why Evan Cole was here, he said. Helen paused. He was a good candidate, she said. Edward looked at her. That's not a medical phrase, he replied. Helen's voice lowered slightly, almost defensive. He wanted control, she said. He wanted to feel safe. Edward's gaze held her. And you believed control would make him safe, Edward said. Helen's eyes flicked away. It does, she said quickly. For most people. Edward nodded slowly. And for the ones it doesn't, he said, it becomes an invitation to endure. Helen's jaw clenched. You're suggesting he chose to die, she said. Edward's voice stayed quiet. I'm suggesting he chose not to leave, he replied. Those aren't the same. The monitoring suite was the least attractive room Edward had seen so far. That mattered. Places that cared about appearance often hid their real work in rooms like this. Screens. Graphs. Audio panels. No video. Edward noted that immediately. No cameras, he said. Helen crossed her arms slightly. Privacy, she replied. Patients consent to audio and biometrics. Not visual surveillance. Edward looked at her. You're telling me your highest risk environment is the one you can't actually see, he said. Helen's mouth tightened. We can hear them, she said. Edward nodded. Then you can hear guilt, he replied. Helen blinked. What? Edward didn't explain. He turned to the console. Play the audio from that night, he said. Donna Keene was in the room now too, standing near the doorway as if she wanted to be able to leave quickly. She looked tired. Not the sleepy tired. The moral tired. Edward glanced at her. You were on shift, he said. Donna nodded. Yes, she replied. What did you hear? Edward asked. Donna hesitated. Breathing, she said. Talking. The module. Edward nodded. And what did you not hear? Donna swallowed. Panic, she said. Edward looked back to the console. Play it, he said. The room filled with sound. Evan's voice, calm at first. Hello. The module, you do not need to respond. Edward listened, not just to words but to timing. The module's voice was too smooth. Not human smooth. Scripted smooth. Then Evan again. I don't trust myself with other people. Edward's pen paused. He glanced at Helen. She wasn't watching him. She was watching the timeline like a person trying to predict where shame might land. Edward listened further. Then it came. A moment that made Donna stiffen. Evan, I think I should leave. The module, you are experiencing a common urge to escape discomfort. Edward's eyes narrowed. He said nothing. The audio continued. And then, faintly, a second sound. Not a full sentence. A soft human intake of breath. A small murmur almost beneath the module's voice. Edward leaned closer to the speaker. Stop, he said. The audio halted. Helen frowned. What is it? She asked. Edward didn't answer immediately. He rewound 10 seconds. Play that again, he said. They played it. There it was again. A faint sound that didn't belong to Evan or the module. Donna's face tightened. That's just interference, she said quickly, too quickly. Edward looked at her. Interference doesn't breathe, he replied. Donna swallowed. Edward turned to Helen. Who else had access to the audio channel? He asked. Helen's expression tightened. Staff can check in, she said. Through the intercom. Edward nodded. And did anyone check in? He asked. Helen's voice was careful now. No, she said. Not at that time. Edward looked at Mark Ellison. Is the module pre-recorded? Edward asked. Mark frowned. It's adaptive, he said. It responds to biometrics. Edward nodded. So it speaks when the system decides, he said. Mark looked irritated. Yes, he said. That's the point. Edward's gaze stayed on him. And what else does the system decide? Edward asked. Mark hesitated. Environmental adjustments, he said. Edward nodded. There it is, he murmured. Helen's voice sharpened. Adjustments are gentle, she said. Temperature, airflow. To support relaxation. Edward looked at her. What does relaxation mean in your model? He asked. Helen held his gaze. A reduction in arousal, she said. Edward nodded. And if a person's arousal reduces because they're losing oxygen, he said, does that still count as treatment? The room went quiet. Donna shifted her weight, as if she wanted to leave and also wanted someone to stop her. Mark stared at Edward. That's absurd, he said. We'd notice. Edward looked at him. You noticed the heart stop, he said. Did you notice the decision not to leave? Mark opened his mouth. Closed it again. Edward turned to Donna. Donna, he said gently, tell me about protocol. Donna's voice sounded tired. We don't interfere unless there's a spike, she said. A panic spike. We don't want to reinforce avoidance behavior. Edward nodded. So if someone is dying quietly, he said, they look compliant. Donna's eyes flicked upward. She didn't answer. Edward leaned in. And compliance looks like progress, he said. Donna swallowed. Yes, she whispered. Helen's tone tightened. This isn't fair, she said. You're making this sound like we wanted. I'm not saying you wanted him dead, Edward interrupted calmly. I'm saying your system rewards stillness even when stillness is collapse. Helen's face flushed slightly. We help people, she insisted. Edward nodded. I believe you, he said. That's why this is dangerous. Edward asked for Evan Cole's file. Helen refused at first. Not outright. The polite refusal. It contained sensitive information, she said. Edward met her gaze. So does a corpse, he replied. A beat. Then Helen nodded once. Fine, she said. We'll provide it. In a controlled setting. Edward stood. No, he said. Now. Helen's smile returned, thinner. This is a medical institute, she said. Not a crime scene. Edward looked at her. It became a crime scene the moment your ethics became optional, he replied. Mark Ellison scoffed. Ethics, he muttered. Edward looked at him. You built a door with no outside handle, Edward said. Don't pretend you weren't thinking about control. Mark's jaw tightened. I was thinking about autonomy, he said. Edward nodded. Autonomy is control with consent, he replied. You removed the escape clause. Mark stared at him. There is no key by design, he said. Edward's voice stayed calm. Design is intent, he replied. They moved to a small conference room where Evan Cole's file was placed on the table like a weapon no one wanted to touch. Helen sat opposite Edward. Donna hovered near the door. Mark stayed standing, arms crossed. Edward opened the file. A photo. Evan's eyes looked kind. Kind people often suffered longer. They believed pain was proof of moral effort. Edward scanned diagnosis notes. Generalized anxiety disorder. Obsessive intrusive thoughts. Harm avoidance. Severe guilt response. Then he stopped. A line in a therapist's note. Patient expresses belief that enduring discomfort prevents harm to others. Patient equates self-denial with safety for others. Edward felt something tighten in his chest. He looked up. You knew, he said quietly. Helen blinked. Knew what? She asked. Edward tapped the note. You knew he would endure, he said. He would stay. He would comply. Helen's voice tightened. He wanted to try, she said. Edward nodded. And you wanted a success story, he replied. Mark scoffed. Now you're accusing us of marketing, he said. Edward looked at him. You're a private institute, he replied. Everything you do is marketing. Donna whispered, barely audible. He begged for it. Edward turned to her. Begged for what? He asked. Donna swallowed. To be alone, she said. To be in control. Edward nodded slowly. And did he understand what control would cost him? Edward asked. Donna's eyes lowered. I don't know, she said. Edward looked at Helen. Did you? He asked. Helen's mouth tightened. We followed protocol, she said. Edward's gaze stayed steady. Protocol is what people hide behind when they don't want to say we chose, he replied. Edward returned to safe room 3 alone. He asked for that explicitly. He wanted to feel the space without the Institute's vocabulary filling it. Helen agreed reluctantly. You can go in, she said, but please don't tamper with anything. Edward looked at her. I won't tamper, he said. I'll listen. Helen watched him enter. The door closed behind him with that quiet finality again. Edward stood still. He waited for thoughts to behave normally. They did. But he felt the room's intent anyway, the way the absence of cues forced the mind to supply its own. No clock. No window. No air movement you could hear. Edward breathed in slowly. The air felt thick. Not unbreathable. But persuading. He walked to the door sensor and placed his palm against it lightly. Nothing happened. He pressed harder. Click. Unlocked. So the door required will. Good. A door that required will also required a person who still had it. Edward looked at the bed. A man had died there without fighting. Edward imagined the mechanism. Not poison. Not a blade. A set of gentle conditions that rewarded stillness until stillness became fatal. He felt anger again. Not at the technology. At the arrogance. He moved his fingers along the wall. No seams. He crouched, listening at floor level. No obvious vent sounds. Then, faintly, he felt it again. A low vibration you couldn't hear, but your ribcage understood. Edward stood and closed his eyes. Infrasound. Not enough to knock you unconscious. Just enough to make your body feel like resistance was pointless. Edward's eyes opened. "Hello," he said aloud. The word felt rude in here. He smiled grimly. "Good," he murmured. "That's how I know you're doing something." He left the room and found Helen waiting. "Well?" she asked. Edward looked at her. "Your room is designed to reduce internal argument," he said. "That makes it a weapon for the wrong patient." Helen's face tightened. "We screen," she repeated, weaker now. Edward nodded. "And yet Evan Cole was here," he said. "Because the wrong patient is the one who makes your results look miraculous." Helen's eyes flashed. "That's cynical," she said. Edward's voice stayed calm. "No," he replied. "It's human." Back in the monitoring suite, Edward asked for one more thing. "The raw environmental logs from that night," he said. "Minute by minute." Mark Ellison hesitated. "There's nothing unusual," he said. Edward looked at him. "Then you won't mind proving it," he replied. Mark's jaw tightened. He pulled up the log. Numbers and timestamps. Edward didn't need to understand every variable to see the shape. At 12:34 a.m., a shift. At 12:36, another. Small. Incremental. A steady adjustment in airflow exchange. A reduction that would be described as soothing. Edward's eyes narrowed. He pointed. "What does this setting do?" Edward asked. Mark hesitated. "It reduces exchange slightly," he said. "To stabilize the environment. Less draft, less sensation." Edward nodded. "And co?" he asked. Mark's gaze flicked away. "It rises slightly," he admitted. Edward's voice was quiet. "And what does elevated co do to a nervous system?" he asked. Mark's face tightened. "It can," he began. Edward finished it for him. "It can cause breathlessness," he said. "Confusion. A feeling of panic." Helen interjected quickly. "Within safe limits," she said. Edward looked at her. "Safe limits for who?" he asked. Helen didn't answer. Edward leaned closer to the screen. He saw Evan's heart rate trend. Declining gradually. Not spiking. Just surrendering. He felt a cold clarity settle. Edward turned to Donna. "Why didn't you intervene?" he asked gently. Donna's eyes glistened with anger, at herself, at them, at the building. "Because he sounded calm," she whispered. Edward nodded. "Calm," he repeated. Donna's voice broke slightly. "He said he was doing the right thing," she said. He sounded relieved. Edward's gaze tightened. "Relief," he murmured. Relief again. It kept showing up in these cases. Relief was often where harm hid best. Edward listened to the audio one more time. He found the moment. "Evan, if I leave, I'll have to talk to people again. The module, this discomfort will pass." Then, faintly, that other sound. A human breath. A murmur, too small to be a sentence, too shaped to be noise. Edward froze. He rewound. He played it again. It was clearer the third time, not because it changed, but because Edward's mind had stopped trying to dismiss it. Someone had been on the line. Not in the room. On the channel. Edward looked at Donna. "Did you speak to him?" Edward asked quietly. Donna stared at him. "No," she said immediately. Edward didn't move. "Did anyone?" he asked. Helen's face tightened. "No," she said. Edward held her gaze. "You're lying," he said calmly. Helen's eyes flashed. "That's inappropriate," she said. Edward didn't raise his voice. "It's accurate," he replied. "And accuracy is the only thing that will keep the next one alive." Mark scoffed. "There won't be a next one," he said. Edward looked at him. "You built a system that rewards endurance," he replied. "Your institute will keep using it until it's forced not to." Mark's jaw clenched. "It's sealed now," Helen said quickly. Edward turned to her. "For how long?" he asked. Helen hesitated. "Until the review is complete," she said. Edward nodded. "And who controls the review?" he asked. Helen didn't answer. Edward didn't need her to. He left the institute late that night. Rain had finally committed, streaking the driveway and turning the gravel into something slick and uncertain. Edward sat in his car without starting the engine. He looked back at the building. A place designed to keep people safe by giving them control. A place that had killed a man by rewarding his willingness to endure. Edward opened his notebook and wrote a single line. In a locked room, the killer is often the idea that you shouldn't open the door. He closed the notebook. Then, after a pause, he added a second line beneath it. And someone always teaches that idea. Edward started the engine. As he drove away, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. A single message. Stop digging. You'll break what works. Edward stared at it for a moment, then set the phone down. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. He already knew the most important thing the message revealed. This wasn't an accident. It was protected. Edward Hale slept badly that night. Not because of nightmares. Because his mind refused to close the door. Safe Room 3 had stayed with him, not as a place, but as a sensation. That subtle pressure in the chest. That feeling, not of panic, but of persuasion. By morning, Edward knew one thing with uncomfortable certainty. If Evan Cole had died quietly, it wasn't because the system failed. It was because it worked exactly as intended. Edward returned to the Ashcroft Institute at 8:12 a.m. Earlier than scheduled. Earlier than polite. The receptionist looked up in surprise. Dr. Morris isn't expecting. I know, Edward said calmly. That's why I'm here now. He didn't wait for permission. Institutions hated that. Donna Keene was already on shift. She sat at the monitoring desk with the posture of someone who had decided not to cry at work anymore. Edward stopped beside her. Morning, he said. Donna nodded. Morning, she replied. Edward watched the screens for a moment, the empty graphs, the calm lines waiting for bodies to justify them. How many safe rooms are active right now? Edward asked. Donna hesitated. 2, she said. Edward looked at her. There were 3, he said. Donna's jaw tightened. Yes, she replied. Edward let that sit. And, he prompted. Donna swallowed. They reopened room 1 last night, she said. Different patient. Edward felt a slow, controlled anger rise. They reopened it, he repeated. Donna's voice was quiet. They said the risk was specific, she said. That Evan was an exception. Edward nodded. Exceptions are how systems survive scrutiny, he said. Donna looked at him. You think it could happen again, she said. Edward's gaze didn't leave the screens. I think it already is, he replied. He asked for the patient's name. Donna didn't want to give it. Not because of protocol. Because names made things real. Claire Dunham, she said finally. 29. Edward turned. "What's her diagnosis?" he asked. Donna hesitated. 2, she said. Edward looked at her. "There were 3, he said." Donna's jaw tightened. "Yes," she replied. Edward let that sit. "And," he prompted. Donna swallowed. "They reopened room 1 last night," she said. "Different patient." Edward felt a slow, controlled anger rise. "They reopened it," he repeated. Donna's voice was quiet. "They said the risk was specific," she said. "That Evan was an exception." Edward nodded. "Exceptions are how systems survive scrutiny," he said. Donna looked at him. "You think it could happen again," she said. Edward's gaze didn't leave the screens. "I think it already is," he replied. He asked for the patient's name. Donna didn't want to give it. Not because of protocol. Because names made things real. "Claire Dunham," she said finally. 29. Edward turned. "What's her diagnosis?" he asked. Donna hesitated. "Severe anxiety," she said. "Fear of losing control. Fear of causing harm." Edward closed his eyes briefly. Same pattern. Different body. He opened them. "When did she go in?" he asked. "An hour ago," Donna replied. Edward checked his watch. "Then we have time," he said. Donna looked at him sharply. "For what?" she asked. Edward met her gaze. "To stop the room from doing what it was built to do," he said. Dr. Helen Morris arrived moments later, irritation barely contained beneath professionalism. "You're overstepping," she said quietly as they walked down the corridor. Edward didn't slow. "You reopened the room," he said. Helen's jaw tightened. "After consultation," she replied. Edward glanced at her. "With whom?" he asked. Helen's voice cooled. "With the board," she said. Edward nodded. "And Dr. Leonard Price?" he asked. Helen paused. "He agreed," she said. Edward felt a flicker of something cold. "He agreed," he repeated. Helen stopped walking. "You don't understand," she said. "Leonard is devastated. He believes Evan's death was a misinterpretation," Edward said. "Not a failure." Helen's silence confirmed it. Edward continued walking. "You've convinced yourselves the patient misunderstood the system," Edward said. "So now you're testing whether I'm better if patient survives." Helen caught up with him. "This is standard clinical reasoning," she said. Edward stopped and turned. "No," he said calmly. "This is confirmation bias dressed as science." They reached the monitoring suite. Room 1's vitals glowed on the screen. Heart rate elevated. Respiration uneven. Edward leaned closer. "What's the system running?" he asked. Helen crossed her arms. "Baseline relaxation," she said. Edward looked at Donna. "Has the environmental protocol adjusted?" Edward asked. Donna hesitated. "Not yet," she said. Edward nodded. "Good," he replied. "Then we're still before the persuasion phase." Helen snapped. "You're anthropomorphizing software," she said. Edward looked at her. "No," he replied. "I'm recognizing intention." Helen scoffed. "Machines don't have intention," she said. Edward's voice stayed level. "But people who program them do," he replied. Edward asked for a private meeting with Dr. Leonard Price. Helen resisted. Briefly. Then agreed. Price's office overlooked the coast. Glass walls. Minimal furniture. The aesthetic of someone who believed clarity was moral. Leonard Price stood when Edward entered. Mid-50s. Controlled posture. Eyes that looked tired only when they weren't being observed. "Mr. Hale," Price said. "I'm sorry we meet under these circumstances." Edward shook his hand. Circumstances are usually the point, Edward said. Price smiled faintly. You believe my work killed a man, he said. Edward didn't sit. I believe your work removed his reason to leave, he replied. Price gestured to a chair. Edward ignored it. Price spoke first. Evan Cole did not die because of our system, Price said. He died because his condition was more severe than anticipated. Edward tilted his head slightly. Your screening identified his guilt response, Edward said. Your notes say so. Price nodded. Yes, he said. Which is why the room was appropriate. Edward's gaze sharpened. Explain that, Edward said. Price folded his hands. People like Evan are constantly hijacked by imagined responsibility, Price said. The safe room removes external variables. It allows them to experience consequence-free existence. Edward's voice was calm. There is no such thing, he said. Price smiled slightly. There is in a sealed system, he replied. Edward shook his head. No, he said. There is only delayed consequence. Edward leaned forward. Why no cameras? Edward asked. Price didn't hesitate. Because observation alters behavior, he said. We remove the sense of being watched. Edward nodded. And replace it with the sense of being judged by the system, he said. Price raised an eyebrow. The system is neutral, he said. Edward smiled faintly. So was the door, he replied. Price stood and walked to the window. People are drowning in choices, he said. We offer them relief. Structure. A boundary. Edward watched his reflection in the glass. And what happens, Edward asked, when the boundary becomes a cliff? Price turned. That's melodramatic, he said. Edward's voice sharpened slightly. So is calling hypoxia a relaxation, he replied. Price's smile vanished. That adjustment is minimal, Price said. It supports parasympathetic response. Edward nodded. And who decided that a body failing quietly is a success metric? Edward asked. Price's eyes hardened. You're suggesting we intended harm, he said. Edward replied evenly. I'm suggesting you accepted the possibility and moved forward anyway, he said. Price held his gaze. Progress has a cost, Price said. Edward nodded slowly. And you decided who pays it, he replied. Edward left Price's office with one certainty reinforced. Leonard Price was not reckless. He was convinced. Convinced people were the problem. Convinced systems were the cure. Those were the most dangerous architects. Back in the monitoring suite, the numbers had shifted. Room 1's respiration had slowed. Heart rate declining. Edward leaned in. Has the environmental protocol engaged? Edward asked. Donna swallowed. Yes, she said. 2 minutes ago. Edward looked at Helen. Turn it off, he said. Helen shook her head. We can't interfere mid-session, she said. Edward's voice was quiet but firm. You can, he said. You're choosing not to. Helen's jaw tightened. This is treatment, she insisted. Edward pointed at the screen. That's a person, he said. The audio feed clicked on. Claire Dunham's voice was tight. I feel dizzy, she said. The module responded smoothly. This sensation will pass. Edward felt his stomach drop. Same script. Same timing. Edward leaned toward the microphone. Claire, he said calmly. This is Edward. You need to open the door. Helen reached for his arm. You can't. Edward shrugged her off. Claire, he repeated. The discomfort is not a test. Open the door now. Claire's breathing was audible. But the voice says, she began. Edward cut in. The voice is wrong, he said. It's a program. Silence. Then Claire whispered, "If I leave, does that mean I failed?" Edward closed his eyes for half a second. "No," he said. "It means you chose yourself." A pause. The vitals spiked. Heart rate increased. Respiration accelerated. Helen gasped. "That's panic," she said. Edward ignored her. "Claire," he said. "Put your hand on the door." Seconds stretched. Then, a click. The door unlocked. The number stabilized. Claire began to cry. Not in terror. In relief. Helen stared at the screen. "You disrupted the treatment," she said. Edward turned to her. "I interrupted a rehearsal," he replied. Donna covered her mouth with one hand. She looked like someone who had just realized she'd been standing beside a cliff without noticing. Later, in a small conference room, the atmosphere had shifted. No one spoke easily now. Edward sat across from Helen, Donna, Mark Ellison, and Leonard Price. Price looked furious. "You had no authority to intervene," he said. Edward met his gaze. "And yet the patient is alive," Edward replied. Price stood. "You undermined the methodology," he snapped. Edward remained seated. "You exposed it," he replied. Price's voice shook slightly. "She panicked," Price said. "That's regression." Edward nodded. "And yet she's breathing," he said. Curious. Edward placed the audio transcript on the table. "You told me no one spoke to Evan," Edward said. Price's eyes flicked to Helen. Helen looked away. Edward continued. "This transcript shows a live intercom activation at 1:58 a.m., Edward said. A human breath. A murmur. Mark frowned. "That's not possible," he said. Edward slid the paper toward him. "It's logged," Edward said. "Someone manually accessed the channel." Mark's eyes widened slightly. He looked at Helen. Helen's face drained of color. Edward turned to her. "Who spoke to him?" Edward asked quietly. Helen swallowed. "No one spoke," she said. Edward leaned forward. "You don't need to speak to influence," he said. "You just need to confirm." Price's eye sharpened. "What are you implying?" he asked. Edward looked at him. "I'm implying someone listened," Edward said. "And chose not to contradict the system." Donna's voice broke. "I was there," she whispered. Everyone turned. "I heard him struggling," Donna said. "And the module said he was doing well." She looked at Price. "So I didn't say anything," she said. "Because if I did, I'd be the one breaking protocol." Silence filled the room. Edward let it. This was the sound of responsibility landing. Price spoke slowly now. "You're turning staff hesitation into malice," he said. Edward shook his head. "No," he replied. "I'm turning it into causation." Price's voice hardened. "People must trust the system," he said. Edward met his gaze. "Then the system must be trustworthy," he replied. Edward stood. "This institute has two choices," he said. "You shut down the safe rooms immediately, or this becomes a criminal investigation." Price laughed sharply. "You can't criminalize therapy," he said. Edward's eyes were cold. "You can criminalize negligence," he replied. "Especially when it repeats." Price stared at him. "You think Evan wasn't the only one," Price said. Edward nodded. "I think he was the first you noticed," he replied. Price's smile returned, thin, dangerous. "You're wrong," he said. "This works." Edward held his gaze. "Then prove it without locking anyone inside," Edward said. Price said nothing. That night, Edward reviewed older records. Not deaths. Discharges. Patients who left early. Patients labeled non-compliant. Patients who vanished from follow-ups. One note repeated again and again. Patient terminated protocol prematurely. Edward underlined it. Premature according to whom? At 11:41 p.m., Edward received a message. Unknown number. You embarrassed us today. Leonard wants to demonstrate the system personally. Edward stared at the screen. Then he stood. He already knew what the demonstrate meant. Edward drove back to the institute at speed. Rain lashed the road. Lights blurred. When he arrived, the parking lot was nearly empty. Inside, alarms were silent. Donna met him at the door, eyes wide. He went in, she said. Room 3, Edward said. Donna nodded. He locked it himself, she whispered. Edward felt the weight of inevitability press down. Price had decided to become proof. The most dangerous experiment. Edward ran. Not for drama. For time. Edward Hale reached safe room 3 at 11:56 p.m. The corridor felt longer than it had the day before. Not physically. Psychologically. Thick carpet swallowed the sound of his steps. The walls absorbed everything else. Even urgency felt muted here, like the building had learned how to dampen human intent. Donna Keene followed him, breath short and shallow. He didn't tell anyone, she whispered. Edward didn't slow. He didn't need to, he replied. He thinks consent is a shield. They reached the sealed wing. The outer access door was open. Which meant someone had let him through. Which meant this wasn't an impulsive stunt. It was permitted. Edward's jaw tightened. Helen Morris stood near the monitoring suite, pale but controlled. Mark Ellison was beside her, arms crossed so tightly it looked painful. Helen saw Edward and spoke quickly. He insisted, she said. He said it was the only way to end speculation. Edward stared at her. And you let him, he said. Helen's eyes flashed. He's the director, she snapped. Edward's voice stayed level. And you're a doctor, he replied. That's supposed to mean something. Helen swallowed. It's already done, she said. Edward nodded once. Then we manage what happens next, he replied. Play the audio. Room 3's audio feed clicked on. At first, nothing but faint ambient tone, the electronic equivalent of a blank expression. Then Leonard Price's voice. Calm. Clear. Almost pleased with itself. I'm beginning the session, Price said. Baseline protocol. No intervention. Edward felt his stomach tighten. Price wasn't just participating. He was directing. Even from inside. Helen leaned toward the console. His vitals are stable, she said, as if stability were the point. Edward didn't answer. Donna stood with both hands clasped in front of her, knuckles white. Mark stared at the screen like he wanted numbers to keep him safe from consequence. The module spoke. Welcome, it said. You are safe here. Price chuckled softly. Excellent, he said. Proceed. Edward's eyes narrowed. He's talking to it, Donna whispered. Edward nodded. He's treating it like a witness, he said. The module continued. Your heart rate is elevated. This is expected. You are not in danger. Price replied immediately, voice smooth. I am not in danger, he said. I am in control. Edward leaned closer to the speaker. Even without seeing him, Edward could hear the posture in Price's voice. The rigid calm of someone forcing composure into proof. Minutes passed. The vitals remained steady, almost too steady. Price breathed slowly, deliberately. He wasn't relaxing. He was performing relaxation. Edward watched the clock. 12:34 a.m. approached like a familiar marker. He glanced at the environmental log panel. Donna saw him and whispered. That's when it changed for Evan. Edward nodded. Helen kept her eyes on the heart rate. Mark watched airflow numbers like a priest watching scripture. At 12:34, the system adjusted. Small changes. A fraction less exchange. A gentle shift in temperature. A barely measurable rise in CO. Edward felt a cold certainty settle. Here it comes. Price's voice came through again. I can feel the shift, he said calmly. Good. That's the parasympathetic response. Edward's jaw tightened. He could hear the self-satisfaction. The belief that naming a sensation controlled it. Then Price paused. Not long. Just long enough. I feel pressure, he said. The module responded immediately. This sensation will pass. You are relaxing deeply. Price's voice stayed composed. Correct, he said. Edward looked at Helen. She looked back, defensive. This is normal, she said. Edward didn't argue. He didn't need to. Normal was often the mask of harm. At 1:17 a.m., Price's breathing changed. Still controlled, but heavier now. He spoke again, slightly slower. Continue, he said, as if he were instructing a trainee. Edward leaned closer to the speaker. He could hear the subtle difference between calm and effort. Effort was always louder. The module spoke. You are doing well. Price laughed once, short, brittle. Of course I am, he said. Edward felt the first flash of something like pity. Not for Price. For the people who had trusted him. At 1:52 a.m., the heart rate dipped lower than expected. Helen frowned. That's unusually low, she murmured. Mark shook his head. Still within physiological tolerance, he said. Edward turned to him. Tolerable is not the same as safe, Edward said. Mark's jaw tightened. It's designed, he muttered. Edward nodded. That's the problem, Edward replied. Donna whispered, voice shaking slightly. Shouldn't we stop it? Helen's eyes snapped to her. No, Helen said. If we interfere, we invalidate the demonstration. Edward looked at Helen. You're still calling it a demonstration, he said. Helen swallowed. What else is it? She demanded. Edward's gaze was steady. A man trapping himself in his own ideology, he replied. At 1:58 a.m., the audio feed picked up something else. A faint inhale. A murmur. Not the module. Not Price. Helen stiffened. Mark leaned closer. Donna's eyes widened. Edward's blood went cold. It was the same signature as Evan's recording. A live intercom activation. Someone listening. Someone present. Edward looked at Donna. She shook her head frantically. It's not me, she whispered. Edward didn't answer. He stared at Helen. Helen's face drained of color. Edward's voice dropped. Who's on the channel? He asked. Helen didn't speak. Mark stared at the console. It's not possible, he muttered. The channel's locked unless... Edward cut in. Unless someone with admin access overrides it, he said. Mark looked up. Only a few people had that level of access. He looked at Helen. Helen looked away. And that was another answer. Inside the room, Price spoke again. His voice had changed. Not panicked, but thinner. As if speech itself required more effort. System, Price said, breath uneven, confirm oxygen saturation. The module replied calmly. Oxygen levels are within acceptable parameters. Price exhaled. Good, he thought. Edward could almost hear the thought. Then Price said something that made Edward's stomach drop. I will remain, Price said. I will not open the door. Helen leaned forward. Leonard, she said quietly into the microphone, forgetting her own rules for a second. Price did not respond. The module did. You are doing the right thing. Edward's eyes narrowed. That phrase. That exact phrase. The same one Evan had heard. The same one that had carried moral weight. Edward turned to Helen. Did you program it to say that? He asked. Helen swallowed. It's motivational, she whispered. Edward's voice was flat. It's lethal, he replied. At 2:11 a.m., Price coughed. A dry sound. A body trying to correct chemistry. His breathing became shallow. Helen's voice sharpened. This is deteriorating, she said. Mark stared at the numbers. His CO is rising, he said quietly, as if saying it softly would make it less real. Donna took a step back. We have to, she began. Helen lifted a hand. No, she said. Edward stared at her. You're doing it again, he said quietly. Helen's eyes flashed with fear and anger. This is his choice, she said. Edward nodded. Yes, he said. And you're letting him prove a point at the cost of his life. Helen's mouth tightened. He would want it, she said. Edward's gaze sharpened. You're still outsourcing responsibility, he replied. Edward grabbed the microphone. Leonard, he said calmly. Open the door. Silence. Edward repeated, louder. Open the door. Price's voice came faintly, strained. If I open it, he whispered, then the method fails. Edward closed his eyes briefly. There it was. Not a locked room mystery. A locked identity. Edward spoke carefully, as if selecting words that could cut through ideology. Leonard, Edward said, your method is not a religion. It doesn't need martyrs. Price breathed heavily. You don't understand, he whispered. Edward's voice was cold. I understand perfectly, he said. You built a system that punishes doubt, and now doubt is the only thing that could save you. Price did not answer. The module did. Remain calm. At 2:28 a.m., Helen stood abruptly. We're opening it, she said. Mark looked horrified. We can't, he said. There's no external mechanism. Helen's voice rose. Then break it, she snapped. Mark's jaw clenched. It will compromise the entire unit, he said. Donna stared at them both. He's dying, she said softly. Edward looked at Mark. How long to force it? Edward asked. Mark hesitated. With tools, he said. 10 minutes. Maybe. Edward nodded. Then start, he said. Mark didn't move. Helen's eyes widened. Mark, she ordered. Mark's face tightened. If we break it, he said, we admit the design is flawed. Edward looked at him. Mark, he said evenly, if you don't break it, you admit something worse. Mark swallowed. Donna whispered. That we care more about the room than the person. Mark's eyes flicked to her. Then to Edward. Then he moved. Tools arrived. Metal screamed against metal. The Institute's pristine calm fractured into noise. Edward stood in the corridor listening to the sound of a system being forced to acknowledge the outside. Inside, Price's breathing was ragged now. He spoke once, faintly. Do not, he began. The module cut in smoothly. You are doing well. Edward felt anger flare sharply. Not at Mark. Not at Helen. At that voice that sounded like kindness and functioned like a noose. Edward reached for the intercom control. He turned the module off. The silence that followed was immediate and brutal. No reassurance. No script. Just breath. Just reality. Donna looked at him, shocked. You can do that, she whispered. Edward didn't look away from the door. Yes, he said. Helen stared at him. Why didn't we, she began. Edward's voice was quiet. Because you liked what it let you call progress, he replied. The door finally gave way. Not gracefully. It buckled inward with a groan like an animal forced to kneel. Cold air rushed in. Edward moved first. He stepped into the room and felt the thickness immediately. Not a smell. A sensation. Chemistry had been drifting toward danger for hours. Price was on the bed, face pale, lips slightly blue, eyes open but unfocused. Not dead yet. Not gone. Just suspended between ideology and biology. Edward leaned close. Leonard, he said. Look at me. Price blinked slowly. His voice was a thread. I didn't open it, he whispered. Edward nodded. I know, he said. That's why we did. Price's eye shifted slightly, as if trying to find the door. Did it work? He whispered. Edward's gaze held him. It worked exactly as designed, Edward said. Price's lips moved. A faint, bitter laugh. Then a cough. Then his body fought. And then, quietly, stopped. Time of death was recorded. 2:46 a.m. No dramatic final words. Just a man who refused to admit his own system required rescue. Donna stood near the doorway, hands trembling. Helen stared at Price with a look that wasn't grief. It was arithmetic. Counting how many things would collapse now. Mark Ellison looked sick. He had built the door. Now he knew what it had meant. Later, in the conference room, the institute felt different. The citrus scent couldn't cover anything anymore. Edward sat across from Helen and Mark. Donna stood behind them, still too honest to sit. Helen spoke first, voice hoarse. This wasn't supposed to happen, she said. Edward nodded. It was always going to happen, he replied. Mark slammed his palm on the table. No, he snapped. It was safe. Within limits. Edward looked at him. And yet 2 people are dead, he said. Mark's jaw tightened. They chose, he began. Edward cut him off calmly. They complied, he said. You confuse compliance with choice. Mark stared. Edward continued. Evan Cole believed enduring discomfort kept others safe, Edward said. Leonard Price believed enduring discomfort kept his theory alive. He paused. The system rewarded both beliefs, he said. Until it killed them. Helen's eyes filled with anger. You're saying it's our fault, she said. Edward met her gaze. I'm saying it's your responsibility, he replied. Helen laughed once, bitter. We helped so many, she said. Edward nodded. I believe you, he replied. That's why this is tragic. You built a tool that sometimes helps people and sometimes kills the ones most desperate to be good. Donna's voice trembled. He was so polite, she whispered. Evan. Edward looked at her. Polite people die quietly, he said. Because they don't want to make a scene. Helen flinched. Edward slid a printed log across the table. The intercom override. The human breath. The murmur. Who accessed the channel during Evan's session? Edward asked. Helen stared at it. Mark leaned in, eyes widening. That's admin access, he whispered. Edward nodded. Exactly, he said. Helen swallowed. It might have been Leonard, she said quietly. Edward's gaze sharpened. Leonard listened, he said. While the module told Evan he was doing the right thing. Helen's face crumpled slightly. He wanted data, she whispered. Edward nodded. And he got a death, he replied. Mark looked sick. So he didn't kill him, Mark said. He just let it happen. Edward's voice stayed calm. That's what makes it worse, he said. Because it felt moral. Edward stood. This institute closes the safe rooms today, he said. Permanently. Helen's eyes widened. We can't, she said. The board. Edward looked at her. The board will do what boards do, he said. They'll talk until someone else dies. He paused. You can choose to be faster than tradition, he said. Helen stared at him, breathing hard. Mark's voice was small. You're going to report this, he said. Edward nodded. Yes, he said. With names. Helen flinched. Edward's tone remained level. You like lists here, he said. Let's make one that matters. Outside, dawn broke over the coast. The institute looked peaceful again. But now Edward could see what that peace had been made of. Silence. Design. A belief that people were safest when they obeyed the structure. Edward wrote one sentence in his notebook before he left the building. A locked room doesn't need a killer if it can convince you not to open the door. He closed the notebook. Then added a second line beneath it, more quietly. And the most dangerous voice is the one that sounds like care. The Ashcroft Institute did not close immediately. That would have looked like guilt. Instead, it announced a temporary suspension of the Safe Room program, pending internal review and external consultation. The language was precise. Careful. Designed to absorb impact. Edward Hale had seen it before. Institutions never fall. They shed weight. Leonard Price's death certificate listed cardiorespiratory failure. No mention of ideology. No mention of conviction. No mention of a man who refused to leave a room because leaving would have meant being wrong. Edward read the report once. Then folded it and placed it back on the table. Accuracy, he'd learned, often came without acknowledgement. Donna Keene resigned 3 days later. No announcement. No ceremony. She left her badge on the monitoring desk and walked out without looking back. Edward met her once more, briefly, at a cafe near the coast. She looked older. Not tired. Heavier. I keep hearing his breathing, she said quietly. Both of them. Edward nodded. That won't stop, he said. It just changes volume. Donna stared into her cup. They trusted us, she said. That room, it felt so calm. Edward's voice was gentle. So do places where people drown, he said. Donna nodded once. I won't work somewhere quiet again, she said. Edward almost smiled. Mark Ellison stayed. That surprised Edward. Engineers often left when the myth broke. But Mark remained at Ashcroft under a different title. Compliance consultant. The irony was not lost on either of them. They spoke once, briefly, as Edward prepared to leave. I built exactly what they asked for, Mark said defensively. Edward met his gaze. Yes, he said. That's why this mattered. Mark's jaw tightened. You think I should have refused, he said. Edward shook his head. No, he replied. I think you should have asked who benefits from a door that only opens from one side. Mark looked away. I won't build another one, he said. Edward nodded. That's how this ends, he replied. Quietly. With fewer doors. Helen Morris was placed on administrative leave. Not fired. Not charged. Reviewed. Her interviews with investigators were cooperative, articulate, deeply sincere. She cried exactly twice. Once when speaking about Evan Cole. Once when speaking about Leonard Price. Edward watched the recordings later. She never cried when discussing protocol. That told him more than she intended. Before Edward left, he asked to see Claire Dunham. She was recovering in a bright room with windows that opened. She sat upright when he entered. You're the one who told me to open the door, she said. Edward nodded. Yes, he replied. Claire hesitated. I almost didn't, she said. I thought, if I stayed, I'd be better. Edward pulled a chair closer and Saturday. That room was designed to make endurance feel virtuous, he said. You didn't fail it. It failed you. Claire swallowed. They said panic was bad, she said. Edward's voice was calm. Panic is information, he replied. You listened? Claire looked down at her hands. I was afraid I'd hurt someone, she said. Edward nodded. That fear kept you polite, he said. Not safe. Claire frowned. What's the difference? She asked. Edward met her gaze. Politeness sacrifices you, he said. Safety protects you. Claire breathed out slowly. I think I'd like to leave now, she said. Edward smiled faintly. That's a good instinct, he replied. The safe rooms were dismantled over the next month. Not destroyed. Disassembled. Panels removed. Sensors disconnected. Doors unmounted. Edward watched part of it from a distance, standing in the same corridor where he'd first felt that pressure in his chest. Without the rooms, the building felt louder. Less controlled. More alive. A young technician carried past a pressure sensor and laughed. Feels like overkill now, he said to no one in particular. Edward didn't correct him. Overkill always looked obvious in hindsight. Edward left Ashcroft on a Tuesday morning. No escort. No farewell. The sea was calm. Too calm. He drove for a while without turning on the radio. Some stories didn't need sound layered on top of them. That night, in a city that did not know his name, Edward sat alone and opened his notebook. He turned back to the page where he'd written about locked rooms. He added a final line beneath it. Some doors don't need locks. They just need a reason not to be opened. Edward closed the notebook. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. They're calling it an immersive wellness chamber now. Different branding. Same principle. Edward stared at the screen. Then typed a reply. Does the door open from the outside? 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Reappeared. Then the answer came. No. Edward exhaled slowly. He stood, put on his coat, and reached for his keys. Outside, the street was loud. People arguing. Laughing. Interrupting each other. Edward welcomed it. Noise meant friction. Friction meant choice. And choice, real choice, required the possibility of leaving. Edward stepped into the crowd. Somewhere, someone was designing another room. And somewhere else, someone would need to be told, calmly, clearly, to open the door. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more psychological mysteries where nothing supernatural is happening, and that's what makes it disturbing. New detective stories are released regularly. Until next time, pay attention to the words people choose.